And I know just from your background, like I know every year you and Drew used to take a trip up to the Boundary Waters and do fishing and that event. So that's always been in there. In fact, there were certain times where I feel like you were maybe more excited about going to the Boundary Waters fishing than you were about the upcoming whitetail season, just because it was something new and something to do.
Yeah. And there was no camera,
There you
we
go.
were just us, hanging out, doing and saying whatever we felt like doing and saying, there was no agenda. And he would say that too. He'd say, Dad, let's never do a fishing show. And I'm like, you're right, son. We're never going to do a fishing show.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy though?
What we do.
I think that's a big point because there's still to this day, everybody and their brother has a camera with them and they're hunting and like, there's fun. Like I filmed hunts since I was, 16 years old. And I love watching back on my dad and I doing those, but there was also no pressure, right? It was just us filming hunts so that we could watch them back and have fun with them. The moment it becomes a business and becomes work, it's truly stressful to really handle.
Yeah, and I don't have anybody paying me any money right now from the industry, so I can say and do whatever I want to, and it's pretty refreshing. I'm not saying that, I was saying anything that wasn't true. Sure. I had sponsors, but you got to behave a certain way.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to embarrass them by being too opinionated about something,
sure.
or whatever. No, the only person I'm going to embarrass now is myself and my family, right? I'm not going to embarrass any sponsors. So it's kind of refreshing.
You live to embarrass Drew and Jordan, so that's fine, right? They're used to it by now.
I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I've done that's associated.
I love Drew's reactions just every time. Like I was watching the other one where you guys walked up on G4. And he's just like, yeah, that's a big deer. It was pretty cool. Pretty cool. You're like, get over here and look at this. He's like, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was the master of understatement.
Yeah.
But one thing I did, and probably may have been a mistake, but I made them do their own interviews. Like most of the youth hunts you watch, they're not very much fun to watch because the dad talks the whole time, right?
Yep.
You don't really get that sense of the kid is even a part of this. It's like the dad's deer and the kid was just pulling the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to make sure that those guys did all of the interviews on their youth hunts,
mm-hmm.
and they didn't really like it that much, so that was probably a mistake on my part. It made for a good video, a lot more fun to watch a youth hunt where the kid is the one that's interacting and not the dad.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it kind of drove them away from video where there's like, Dad, I don't even want to do this if the camera's going to be there.
Right.
It's too much pressure.
Well, and that's an interesting thing because like my boys are 9 and 5 now. Like we filmed some stuff this year with them. They each killed their first deer this year and they enjoy it. But again, it's still at that level where like if I get it on film, great. If I don't care. Like you shot your first deer. It's awesome. And that's my biggest fear is at some point, like I know that they want to do more, especially my youngest, like he's all about it. But I also want to kind of hold him back because I'm like, listen, once you really are doing this and really are filming this, it's not as like exciting and off the cuff as you might think it is.
I almost wonder, it seems like, every kid is different and they might take to the camera a different way because they had a kid that started on like Heartland Bow Hunter and he was real young and they made him do this stuff. And he seems to have really taken to it, to where he's running the show.
Well, even if you look at somebody like Taylor Drury, I feel like Taylor Drury was kind of forced into it and she's still there and she's still a personality of it and trying to follow in Mark and Terry's footsteps on that. But, it is a different thing because some kids just don't like it. They like hunting, but that aspect of it being kind of a job is not, attractive to
That's
them.
interesting because as we're going to get into filming, I think some hunts with your boys,
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about taking them turkey hunting in a couple weeks. It'll be interesting to see. We definitely don't want to force them in front of a camera, but who knows? Harlan might want it. He's like, put it on me.
Yeah, I think he will. It's just personality. Because I feel like Drew's kind of like that. Like Drew was one who, was very mild-mannered and just kind of went with the flow type of thing. I feel like Jordan probably was more of an extrovert in terms of when she was doing that stuff.
Yeah, but they both kind of cringed away from having to be quote unquote the host. You know what I'm saying? That was the mistake I think that I made there was I put the burden of carrying the story on them,
right?
Because I felt like that was way better for the video than if I carried the story and said, okay, here's the trigger person,
Right. So they liked going hunting with you and being involved, but the moment that they had to kind of like be the host of it, it shifted it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and if you watch those youth hunts, you'll see that the kids did a really good job.
Oh yeah.
They were very good at it.
I remember like flyer buck and stuff with Drew. And yeah.
I look back at that and I think, wow, these kids did a really good job. but it wasn't necessarily because they wanted to do.
Right. Yeah, they just
you know,
felt,
so
yeah.
I think that was a mistake. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, as they got older, and especially as both of them got into sports, you know, just like any kid, like that time becomes a lot thinner. You know,
Yeah.
priorities
and
change.
You can't expect your kids to love the stuff that you love. They have to love what they love.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they still hunt, but they don't love hunting the way that I did when I was a kid.
Right. Well, and I'm sure that's different, even though, like, if you look at it, like when you were a kid, there were no cameras. It was Bill out there hunting and doing it because he loved it versus, you know, 20 years later, Bill doing it because it was paying the bills.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And so that's one thing that I, you know, and transparently, it's part of watching Drew and Jordan in that scenario that I'm always a little bit hesitant of how my kids are involved in what we do, because it is work for me from a lifestyle standpoint, but I also live to do it, and I want them to have that same attraction. And, you know, I'm leery of how much do we do, you know?
Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's always a parental question too on everything, like even sports, you know, like how hard do you push your kids
Right.
in the things that you can see that they're gifted at?
Yep.
You know, I mean, you may see that boy, this kid is going to be a really good runner or a really good wrestler or whatever. I need to move him, you know, down the fast track. Well, what if the kid doesn't really love it? You know, and now your fast track becomes his horror show.
Yep.
You know, so you got to be really careful in a lot of ways, I think. And I was always pretty good on sports with that, but I think on hunting, I pushed him maybe just a little bit too hard on the being in front of the camera part.
Well, I think that was probably the pressure of it's a business. It's not a hobby.
Yeah.
It's not something we're just out there doing. It literally is, hey, this is supporting the family at this point in time.
This is how you guys are going to go to college if this is successful.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing that, you know, and it is, because you want that inclusion. And then we see that even with other people, like, you know, look at David and Karen, you know, when Warren and Easton were young,
kids involved.
you know, they were heavily involved for a long time. Now that they've kind of grown up, you know, Easton does a little bit, Warren's, you know, involved more than he is. And so it's just an interesting situation, is kind of how you see these kids come up through the ranks, and then, you know, almost that they feel obligated in a way. And you don't want that. I mean, especially in hunting, because the last thing you want in hunting is to feel like it is a job, right? Because that's the worst feeling. Like, you want to be excited to be in a tree stand. You want to be, you know, heart pumping, legs shaking when you see a big buck or shoot a big buck. You don't want to be like, oh, great, I'm glad that's off my shoulders.
I think some
now.
of them probably feel like obligation almost to, like, it's the family business in essence, and they probably like the hunting aspect of it, but they might not know anything different. They're like, well, I need to, you know, film hunts like mom and dad and step into that role. And there's definitely an awkward phase where they either figure it out or they don't.
But, yeah. So that's what I would, just as a word of caution to not people that are in the industry, because they'll figure it out on their own, but just in general, you never push kids in the direction that maybe they don't already have a passion. You have to introduce them and let the passion grow. And then they become more lifetime, you know, members of that activity, rather than, you know, feeling this, you know, kickback that you know, they don't really, it wasn't their thing. You know, it was dad's
right.
thing.